Welcome to Season 3 of the Empowering Women podcast, a production of the Empowering Women in Industry organization. Together, we will hear from ambitious and inspiring career women as they share their stories of success and overcoming career challenges. I'm Charlie Matthews, founder of Empowering Women, and I am proud to introduce our host, Shannon Bumgarner from Femspired.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Empowering Women in Industry podcast. And when you hear this episode, it will be April already. I cannot believe that it's springtime for most of us here. And today I have a powerhouse of a guest, and I'm so excited that I met her about a year ago. She is the CEO and Chief Drama Slayer, which I totally want that title, Patti. Chief Drama Slayer at PersuasionPoint. At PersuasionPoint, they are a modern day consulting firm dedicated to teaching leaders and teams how to create and sustain healthy, inclusive, and profitable workplace cultures. And I'm going to read a little bit of Patti's long bio because I really want you to understand her background as she comes into this conversation. She combines experience as a licensed California attorney. She's a professionally certified HR executive, a tech company leader, a specialist in the prevention and resolution of workplace drama, which I can't wait to hear about, an expert witness in state and federal court. So that's probably some interesting stories there too, Patti. A state regulator, and she has experience as an entrepreneur where she creates revolutionary shifts in the way we communicate and connect at work. And the final thing before we get to Patti, I wanted to say is that she's the author of the best-selling award-winning book, The Drama-Free Workplace, and there will be links to this book in the show notes. How you can prevent unconscious bias, sexual harassment, ethics lapses, and inspire a healthy culture. So welcome, Patti.
Thank you so much. It's a mouthful of a title and subtitle, I know. So
I love the Chief Drama Slayer. That's one of my favorite. When I first saw that with you, Patti, I was like, that is fantastic. That's the best title I've seen in a long time.
I'm so happy with it. My staff and I, in fact, this is going to be something that will probably come up during our talk. You know, one of my philosophies is that in order to have a healthy workplace culture, you have to have a really healthy dose of fun. And in my case, I actually will go one step further, and you've got to be a little goofy. I think that sort of makes you vulnerable and humble. And so we have a lot of fun, and my team and I just came up with this idea that in addition to our formal titles, so I'm CEO and founder, but each one of us selected, what we wanted to be that was a little bit more descriptive. So I have someone on my team who is the human Swiss Army knife, for example, because
I love
she
that.
can do it all. And when I was trying to come up with my fun title, I thought, well, it's got to have the word drama in it. I've already got that as sort of my brand. And what is a word? And I actually did not watch the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but that word just I've always thought was so cool. So
Yep.
you are more than welcome to borrow it, Shannon, whenever you want. Chief Drama Slayer.
I think I'm going to borrow that at my day job just to see what kind of looks I get.
Exactly.
Yep. And so you're going to find out pretty quickly that Patti is sassy. You're going to love her today. So I'm going to start, and I love to start here, Patti, with a tell us your story. So I think we all learn so much from each other's stories. And yours in particular, as we launch this in April, it will be Celebrate Diversity Month. And I think you have such a beautiful story about coming to the U.S. and being such a beautiful part of that immigration story. And I think you have a fascinating tale for our audience. So can you tell us a little bit about coming to the United States and some of your challenges in becoming an attorney?
Sure. I'll kind of weave in both my personal and my professional story. So it starts in El Salvador in Central America. I was born there, and the story of our immigration is a pretty incredible one. My father went to the embassy in San Salvador, and his intention was to get a tourist visa. He was working at a factory that was based in Chicago. My father had a fifth grade education, and so he was a brilliant man, but not with very much formal education. But somehow he had risen to foreman in that factory, and his bosses liked him enough that they really wanted to just send him here on a quick stint to just kind of get some tips and tricks from the Chicago home plant and bring them back. So he went to the embassy, but when he got there, one of the they're called Foreign Service Nationals, and so one of the secretaries was Salvadoran, and my father never knew a stranger, and I definitely get my personality from him. Um, so he walked in, and of course, he knew that the secretary, and she started chit chatting with him. And eventually, she asked him whether he was here for that special program. He said yes, because he just figured that she was referring to the tourist visa program, because that was the only program he knew about. And so she told him that if that was the case, then he was in the wrong line, and she walked him over to a different line. As it turned out, this is 1968, and in 1965, the U.S. had completely revamped its immigration system and had it took away quotas and started really looking at skills and family reunification, and took away not only quotas, but a ban on certain countries, not being allowed to immigrate here. So it turns out that that was the program that the secretary was talking about. And he went into the line that he wasn't intending to, applied for permanent residence as opposed to a tourist visa. And by the end of the day, 50 people who had gone to the embassy that day were selected to be the 50 who would receive permanent residence. So literally, my family and I are in the United States because my father got in the wrong line.
I've heard this story before. I just love it. It's one of my favorite ones. Talk about coincidence and being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking back on it now, in fact, so my family and I just celebrated our 50th anniversary of being in the United States. My dad came in 68. Again, a man with not a lot of formal education, somehow over a 2-year period was able to go through the hoops of the immigration system without speaking very much English, and get permanent residence for myself, my 2 older sisters, and my mom. And it's incredible in many ways, something that I like to talk about. My mom is a huge influence on me. She's actually lived with me for 15 years. But in my formative years, my father was my hero. He was, just such an important part of who I was and who I am. And I say that because I think it's important for men, I think, to understand, if they are fathers, the powerful influence that they have, and the result of, I was born sassy. You've already mentioned that.
Well, Patty, it's one of my favorite things about you. We met each other really quickly for the audience through an organization called Speaking Your Brand. And just, Patty, I've loved you from day one because of your sass, and you bring such insightful commentary to the conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. So I was born with it, but my parents just really fostered it. My father didn't raise us as daughters. He really raised us as his kids, who he had come to the United States for, to live out the American dream. So I always like to mention that, just because I think that, as men start thinking about, well, what can I do? What can my contribution be? And something that I've been thinking about lately a lot with my dad, that sort of translates into today's world and my professional life, is, my dad always believed in me, and he wasn't. I often talk about in the workplace that rather than seeing yourself as an ally, and that's a perfectly fine word to use as long as I think you're viewing it in the right way. If your view of an ally is that you are there to rescue someone, if you think you are there to sort of swoop in and do the work for someone else, or to protect them, then I don't think that you're doing the right work. I use the term radical kinship instead, meaning you walk with me. You are side by side on this journey with me. And while we certainly might celebrate some of the ways in which we are different, we will also identify ways in which we are alike. And you will simply walk with me, not, rescue me. So of course he was my father. Of course he protected me, but so much of, my memories with him were that he really did walk side by side with me, trusted me, and really sort of, allowed me to blossom, and allowed that sassiness to really become, what it is now.
Yeah, Patty, I so agree with you. So I think most of the audience may know this. I unfortunately lost my dad unexpectedly in December, and he was such an ally. And I love that term, radical kinship, because I think he did that for me as well, and allowed me to be the person that I wanted to be and grow into be an engineer, which my parents both thought I was crazy. But that's a whole different story.
That's a couple a pitcher of beer type of story, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's another story that Patty, I've had the fortune to hear you tell, and that's the story about your scholarship. Can you tell our audience that story about scholarship when you were I think it was undergrad, but I may be wrong there.
It was actually law school. And
Oh, was
so,
it? Okay.
fast forwarding, we land in San Francisco. Eventually, we go to LA. I went to high school in Houston. And I have to tell you that the one thing that all those moves did for me is it made me very resilient and very
Mm,
able to sort of adapt, which, was a little bit of a pain growing up, moving around that much, but it worked out in the end. And so I went to high school in Houston, but I was just hungry to get back to California. And so I went back to Los Angeles, where I attended UCLA as an undergraduate and then stayed there and attended law school there as well. So my first year of law school, I had gotten a scholarship that was meant, it was labeled as a Latino, academic scholarship. So I was excited about it. And one day they sent me just some final documentation that needed to be submitted. And I submitted it. And because I was actually born in El Salvador, I put that on there. That was one of the questions. I
right.
got called into the office and they told me that they had to pull the scholarship. And I said, why? I met all the academic requirements. You gave it to me. And they said, well, the scholarship is actually limited, even though we call it a Latino scholarship, it's limited only to people of Mexican descent and Puerto Rican descent. And we honestly would have never known had you been born in the United States. We would have just assumed that you were one of those two. But because you were born in El Salvador, we know that
Unbelievable.
you're Salvadoran. This is so I started law school in 1989, the fall of 1989. And I looked at them and I said, well, why? Like, I'm just really
Makes no
confused.
sense, does
Makes no
it?
sense. And what they told me made even less sense. They said, well, our studies, our research has really shown us that the most underrepresented of all Latino groups are Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans. And because I'm sassy, I looked at the person, I was 21 years old, and I looked at her and said, oh, right. Because every time I turn around at UCLA, I meet another Salvadoran. Like I can't, swing a cat without like hitting a Salvadoran, especially in law school.
Right.
And I was also a
Unbelievable.
little upset. And they looked at me like, huh, yeah, I guess you're right. I'm like, we are so underrepresented
We don't
that
even
we
hit
don't
the
even
radar.
make it. Yeah, exactly.
That's
So
why
there
I
you
love
go.
that story. I've heard it a couple times, and I'm like, the audience has to hear this story. Yeah. Patty, one of the things I usually get a crack a smile out of people is I introduce myself as a recovering perfectionist. But one of the things that you introduce yourself as, it always makes me smile, as a recovering attorney. Can you explain that for the audience, what that means and how that's meant that you've pivoted in your own personal journey?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's a couple of layers to this. So the first layer is that I grew up in this very traditional, household, very traditional immigrant household. And as a result, and I think just my inherent personality, I honestly thought that I was going to get a job at a corporation, work there for 50 years, get my golden watch, and retire from there. I have never thought of myself as being a person who is risk averse. I really am pretty safe. And when people hear me say that, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, when I see the record of your career. And so the first layer is that who you think you are, may not end up being who you actually are when you when
Mm,
you get out into the work world. So I think that's one lesson that I really learned from me, that was important for me. The second is that I followed a path because it made sense. I went to law school. When people ask me why, really, it's because I was accepted. It wasn't because, and I got accepted to UCLA, a top 20 law school. Like, how
sure,
could I
why
say
not, right?
no? But it wasn't because I grew up watching Perry Mason. It wasn't because I had this, burning desire to be a lawyer. I thought it was a nice compromise where I could make a nice living, but still give back to, my community and to society. As it turned out, it was not my cup of tea at all. And so another layer of this, the journey that I had was in really, coming from a family of immigrants, coming from a family of fifth and 12th grade educated parents who were the most amazing parents on earth, but who couldn't guide me,
Sure.
in this realm. And so it was kind of, school of hard knocks. Looking back on it now with 2020 vision, I realized that the reason it wasn't my cup of tea is I'm not a good zealous advocate, which is what being a litigator requires. I see the world in nuance, in gray.
Mm.
It's not right, wrong, black, white, good, bad. And so it was very difficult for me to be that zealous advocate that is required. I also felt that it really underutilized, or in some cases completely missed, my best assets. There are
Mm.
talents, qualities, strengths that I think I have that just weren't used at all. And that's another layer, I think, especially for your audience, that if I have to give a single piece of advice to the young Patti, it would be, identify what your unique strength and the unique value that you bring in as early as possible, and then learn to communicate that. Learn to not only say, here's what I bring to the table, but here's how it helps you.
Yeah, and
So
then
that
when
was
you
another
said this
part of it.
before, it almost felt like, Patty, that you were almost squelching your strengths a little bit because it wasn't fitting into that attorney track. So you were almost taking those things that are the best part of Patty and sort of putting it in a corner. Would that be?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, for anyone out there who is in a profession that is doing that to them, or maybe you found your profession, but you're not in an organization that allows you to really bring, and we hear a lot, a buzzword in this time of diversity, equity, and inclusion is authenticity. And I think that that's an absolutely, great thing to emphasize, that I encourage organizations to be authentic in their commitment to a healthy culture and to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I definitely encourage people, especially women, to be as authentic as possible. But without actually defining what that means, it's very nebulous, what be myself, like that to me is a tangible way of defining it. If you have to make yourself smaller, if you have to change, the unique strengths that you have in order to somehow fit into the current culture, the current organization, the current industry, or the current profession that you're doing yourself a disservice. And frankly, you're doing that organization a disservice as well.
Yeah, and we hear so much to your point about coming in and being your authentic self, but if you're in that wrong place for you, it's really hard to be your authentic self.
Yeah. And so I spent a lot of time doing a lot of soul searching. I didn't just quit being a lawyer. I
Yeah, you didn't just
knew.
wake up on a Monday and say, I'm
Right,
done and
right.
I'm quitting on Friday.
I had student loans to pay off, Shannon. So
Yeah, there you go.
there was and the immigrant industrious, bootstrap me was I barely had boots and barely had straps, but I picked myself up by them in any event. And so it was a long period of time where it really was. And again, this is a layer that I really would encourage your listeners to do is it's never too late. In my case, there was this period of time where I thought, I went to law school. I'm not going to be a lawyer. Like, that's crazy. But thankfully I was able to use the skills that I acquired both in law school and in the 6 or 7 dog years of practice that I spent actually being a
Sure.
lawyer. But then I really shifted and thought, let me actually start thinking about the ways in which I can develop, these strengths that I know I have. And so again, for me, it's just the earlier you can do that, the better. And so as a result of all of that, I'm technically still a licensed attorney. I still pay my fees every year in California. I still understand. I was an employment lawyer, so everything employment related, harassment, discrimination, retaliation, hostile work environment, all of those legal buzzwords was what I did. And I'm still very well versed on the law and continued during that time of my career. I was appointed by 2 governors to be on a commission where I drafted regulations on
Oh,
employment
gosh.
laws. I was the chair of the labor and employment law section of the California State Bar, which is about 10,000 attorneys. So I always, sort of kept that side of me alive. It's just what I actually did day to day and how I made my money was no longer practicing law, and I pivoted from being a litigator to, at the time, being what I call a workplace crisis manager. And so that's where all the investigations came in. And now my last pivot has been from crisis manager to what I call systemic change agent. And so all of that is to say that that's where the term recovering attorney comes in, because
Yep.
I don't want to
When
hide that
I
I'm
love to
there.
hear you introduce yourself that way. It really cracks me up.
Yeah. It's like a 12-step program, right? That
There you go. Yeah, exactly. I think I'm on step 2 or 3 myself. But speaking of drama, the chief drama slayer, as I indicated on the outset, has written a book called The Drama-Free Workplace, which you couldn't have picked a better title, Patti. And in part 1 of this book, it's titled Diagnose Drama, What You Can Do to Identify, Prevent, and Fix Workplace Drama. And in this, you identify several root causes of what causes or what it happens for workplace drama. Can you pick 1 or 2 of those and tell our audience about what a root cause looks like and maybe what they can do to minimize that in their workplace, especially maybe gearing the comment toward females, because that's our large part of our audience?
Absolutely. It's interesting. So the title, when I originally got contacted by the publisher for this book, it was in the midst of Me Too. And he originally wanted it to be, the representative at Wiley wanted it to be a book about Me Too. And when I started telling him not only about my background, but really kind of my theories, and saying sexual harassment is a huge issue in the workplace, but it's not the only issue.
Right.
And so we sort of, went back and forth, and he asked me, well, how do you describe yourself? And I didn't have chief drama slayer yet, in my toolbox, but I said, I talk about it as I resolve drama, because when I describe what I do in that way, everyone knows. Everyone has been involved in workplace drama. Everyone can think of a time when they were either in the middle of it or they observed it. And so it just became a very shorthand way of describing it. And I described, in sort of that second phase of my career when I was doing my investigation. So I conducted in excess of 1,200 workplace investigations. So if you can think of a drama situation at work, from embezzlement and bullying
Oh my
to
goodness.
sexual harassment and sexual assault and everything that you can imagine. I have probably read emails about it. I have probably seen pictures or videos that people sent each other, which always made me scratch my head and ask, what were you thinking?
What were you thinking? TMI. TMI.
Exactly.
What were you thinking?
Every year I had several investigations that were called strip club capers, which was,
Oh my
what
goodness.
supervisor decided it was a good idea to go to Vegas and take their staff, including their female staff, to strip
Oh
joints.
boy.
And I also every year had several porn capers where it was, exchanging pornographic material on emails, which again, what are you thinking?
What were you thinking?
So it was during this time period that I realized I should have gotten a PhD in psychology instead of having gone to law school, because that's what fascinated me. It was the human behavior, the human motivation, what was going through your head when you either sent or received this or said this or didn't say this. And when I finally decided to sort of, put up my dukes, if you will, put up, the gloves of an investigator, one of the reasons that I did that is because I started getting bored. I realized that so many investigations were alike. And so I was conducting maybe a dozen investigations over and over. The fact patterns might be kind of different. The people were certainly different. The geographic area might be different. But there were these themes. There were these underlying themes that you could take a string and string them through all. And one of the things that I identified is that there were these root causes. There were things that were happening in the workplace. And I got to the point, and I knew this is when I knew that I needed to move on, where I could walk into a workplace and diagnose things immediately. I can already tell you, even before I interview my first person, what's going on in this place. I remember one of my last interviews walking into actually an engineering firm and calling my client and saying, I just want to tell you something before I even start interviewing anyone. I've basically walked into the world of Mad Men, the TV show, except the men are way less handsome. Other than that, it is the most sexist, 60s style, work environment. And I already know where this is
I can't
going.
see my audience, but when they hear this, Patti, I think there's going to be head shaking on some of the other end of the headset or whatever they're listening to.
Right, right. They're going to be like, I've been in there. I've been in that
Yep.
workplace.
Yep.
So I was able to identify that. I was able to, after an investigation, say it was this point in time. It was when, Shannon didn't apologize to Patti. It was when Patti went one step too far and Shannon couldn't take it anymore. And so I just started seeing these patterns and these causes. And I'll give you one, and this sort of combines my experience as a lawyer, as an HR executive, et cetera. And that is that there is such a misperception and a wrong perception of these legally charged words that I mentioned earlier. So everyone, when I go to cocktail parties and people find out what I do for a living, everyone wants to talk to me about their boss who harasses them, about their supervisor who created a hostile work environment, about their coworker who's a bully. And the very legally charged term, the harassment, the discrimination, and the retaliation, in 99 out of 100 cases, they don't have a legal claim. It turns out that they just have a deep misunderstanding as to what the law does and doesn't allow. And they're completely convinced that they're going to get, $1 million from their company.
Right.
And so that confusion, what it does, a root cause of drama, is that the approach that is taken then is, I believe that I'm being harassed, and that's kind of the path that I'm going to proceed. What that causes in the recipient is defensiveness if you are the person who is accused of engaging in the behavior. And for the leadership, what that causes is compliance mode. You've now said a magic word. We're going to conduct a formal investigation, and this is going to go in a completely different direction. So
Right.
I'll give the very first tip that we've talked about today. That's super practical on the employee side. To become better versed and to understand kind of why those legally charged terms, A, are often imprecise, and B, end up raising the temperature instead of lowering it, and what you can do instead. I always advocate a three-step process. So the first thing you do is you talk about the words or the behavior, not put that label on it. The second is, how did it affect you? And the third is, what we can do to fix it. And so, you are a sexist pig, and this is sexual harassment, becomes, you seem to enjoy talking about your personal dating life and telling jokes that demean women. I find that to be incredibly exclusionary. It makes me feel like you don't value me or my female teammates as much as you do the men. And it makes me think that your mindset is one where you put women in a certain category that is offensive to me. And I'd like you to stop telling those jokes or to making those comments. And I'm happy to partner with you. If you'd like better jokes, I'll give you some.
Right.
But it's,
I'm funny too, but not
yeah,
about that.
exactly.
Yep.
And so, that's just an example off the top of my head. But what that does is it takes away that the sting of using that legally charged and emotionally charged language. And I would say that same way of reporting it, if it turns out you can't, or it's uncomfortable for you to say that directly to the person who behaved in this manner, but reporting it in that way, saying, here's what happened, here's the effect it's had on me, and here's what I want to do to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now, this only works in an organization if the recipient responds in kind. So if, for example, as I have unfortunately seen too many supervisors and HR professionals do, if the response is, oh my God, that's just Johnny, you know that's just the way he talks, stop being offended, then this is not going to work. If
Oh
by
gosh,
contrast, yeah, because that's one of the root causes, is that on the flip side of this, so on the employee side, I would say that one of the root causes is confusion about what is legal, illegal, et cetera. By the same token, on the flip side, what I've seen too many organizations do is, well, this isn't harassment, this isn't against our policy, or it's not illegal, so it's really not that big of a deal, and we don't have to do anything about it.
but it is a big deal, to your point, because it
Huge deal.
impacts employee engagement and just the overall culture that someone's operating in. And as you well know, it changes how they behave, their performance, and it impacts both them as well as the overall company.
Absolutely. And when you start seeing, I'm going to take a wild guess, that the organizations that the women and men who listen to you, the organizations they belong to, fall into a pattern that most organizations do. And that is that you see a lot of diversity, whether it's racial, whether it's gender, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's disabled, veterans, whatever category you want. We see a ton of it at the entry level. And that number dwindles
Mm.
the higher you go in the organizational chart. And so, in addition to everything else you've pointed out already in terms of what this causes, horrible morale, lack of engagement, a feeling of resentment, a feeling of not being seen or valued or heard.
Yep.
It also, by the way, is the main cause of that diversity attrition. This is
Yep.
women are leaving in droves. I mean, this is pre-COVID. Unfortunately, post-COVID, it's
Right.
also been about that. But they leave in droves. And I can tell you because I've spoken to them, they say to me, because I tried saying, that those jokes are really offensive and make me feel this way. And they only gave me lip service. They claim that they want to have this environment, but then when push comes to shove, the status quo is always maintained.
Yeah, I love what you said about the conversation if you're in the right environment, though, because it reminds me of some training I got called Situation Behavior Impact. They called it SBI for short. So it really helps if you talk about the situation, the behavior that you either observed or felt, and then the impact it had to you and potentially the people around you. I think to your point, that frames it up in a different way. But I love the not using the charged words if you
Right.
can avoid it, because
And
to your point,
by the way,
it takes it in a different direction.
sure. And I want to make sure that this is clear. If you are actually, being sexually harassed, then
Right.
then by all means use that word. It's just
Right.
that in most instances it's not that.
Yep. Good point. But you just talked about workplace cultures, and I know you hear a lot about now authenticity to the point you made earlier, the culture of belonging. You talked about a healthy workplace culture pyramid also in your book. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and talk about the three F's? And my Southern accent is showing, but three F's that are essential to any healthy workplace culture. Because I think our audience would really like to hear that and probably assess their own workplace against this.
Yeah, thank you. So the advice that I just gave right now, for example, was for the employee, right? Somebody who was feeling maybe that they were being excluded or not valued. And what I said was it's equally important now for leadership, for the people who are actually in charge of sort of initially designing the culture. Every employee is in charge of making sure that that culture stays healthy. But so this is really a message now for the leaders in terms of what they should be looking at. But to your point, I agree that it's a great way for an employee who is sort of looking at whether or not the organization they're currently in is the right one for them to sort of measure up against this. So the three F's are fearlessness. I didn't want to use courageous because I had to, have an F in there.
Yeah,
Uh,
there you go.
fearlessness, fairness, and freedom. And so, really quickly, the first two kind of go together. So, fearlessness and fairness. And what I propose in this chapter is, again, sort of combining my experience. I introduce something that I call the litigation avoidance paradox. And so, it really is a paradox of fear, that the paradox in any aspect of our life, if we make assumptions and if we behave out of a place of fear, the paradox is that the chances are you're actually picking the wrong behavior to engage in. And so, in the context of the workplace, what I know that HR folks have been told, a lot of C suite folks have been told, and certainly lawyers advocate this, is what you need to do more than anything is avoid litigation. And so, you need to be, they call it preventative in being fearful that since one day those employees are out to get you, you need to, in advance of that, do things that are going to avoid litigation. So on the fearlessness part, I go through some statistics in the book where I basically make it very clear that we are vastly overestimating the chance that someone might actually bring a claim against a company. And as a result, we're therefore making decisions not only based on fear, but on irrational fear. We're being
Mm.
pulled by something that actually doesn't happen nearly as often as we're scared into thinking it might. So I even have one quote in the book where I go through an analysis where you are twice as likely to get struck by lightning in your lifetime than the likelihood of a single event turning into a claim. So a little bit of hyperbole, but I wanted to bring my point home that
But I
you
think it
need to have
really
the
brings it
courage.
home, though, to your point. Yep.
Yeah. So you have to, the courage to understand what rational fear and irrational fear is. The second
Right.
part of it, which is the fairness, is the second part of the litigation avoidance paradox theory, which is um, paradoxically, what we know, and I can tell you from my experience, and the research backs it up, what we know in terms of why employees do bring claims, whether they are internal or external, is because they don't have a perception of fairness. It's not
Mm,
that I didn't get promoted. It's that the person who got the promotion over me is the boss's son and is completely unqualified. So I'm not
right.
mad that I didn't get the promotion. It's that the process was completely unfair and the perception is that it
Right.
was unfair. It's not that I care that I got the minimum raise. It's that the person who works next to me got the same raise and I perform, objectively better than that person. So the
Right.
distribution of rewards and punishment is unfair. Or I don't mind so much that I got laid off, but did you have to make me feel like an animal when you laid me off? So the
Right.
way in which you communicate with me is so disrespectful that it just makes me feel like it's unfair. So it's those behaviors that drive people to either go over to their attorney's office or do something else. And so it's the combination of both those things that then gets us to the paradox that what we have been told, which is as leaders to sort of always treat employees at arm's length because chances are that they're going to sue us, is actually what drives them to want to sue us. So that's the paradox.
True. Cause I know being a leader myself in an organization, a people manager, you mean there's obviously you have to have a little bit of distance because you do have to treat people fairly, to your point. But I think those relationships for me, Patty, have been so important. And if I was completely aesthetic and it was completely distanced from them, you don't have that culture of belonging that you need. You don't cultivate those relationships, to your point, that you need.
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't, being fair, being professional, doesn't mean not being human. It's I think
Yeah.
that's the part that we've sort of, stripped away. So that's where the fearlessness and the fairness comes in. The final F, which is freedom, is really that again, this is sort of another root cause, is that I feel like we treat employees like children, like very immature children, and to the freedom is about giving them the freedom to be adults, giving line employees the freedom to take a 2 sentence policy and interpret it in a way that works best for them. The
Yep.
example that I give in the book is, I've seen dress code policies that are 10 pages long, and even after reading
Those
the
are one
10
of my favorites,
pages.
Patty. That's what was going through my head as you were talking was dress code policy.
And the worst thing about it isn't even the length, it's that you read the 10 pages and you're like, I have no idea. Can
You're
I
like,
wear
I don't
this
know
or
what I'm
not?
supposed to wear now. I was
Yeah,
more confused than when before I started reading
exactly.
it.
And so I actually use in the book, a real life example of a policy where someone said, we're going to change the dress code and it's just going to be dress appropriately. And this might resonate, with your audience because it was, I think it was GM, I'm forgetting now, but it was an entity, an organization that had both business offices, but also manufacturing.
Yep.
And the thought process of, I believe it was the CEO who implemented it, was we're just going to tell people to dress appropriately. And we're now going to empower the line managers and the plant supervisors to figure out what that means for them. Because
Yep.
for people in the manufacturing plant, that's going to mean steel-toed shoes. Well, we
Right.
don't want to put that in the policy if that's not what you're going to wear in the office setting. And so it's just one of many examples where let employees be adults. Stop treating them like children. Stop treating policies and handbooks as though they are
Yep.
a way to get in trouble.
Yep. And some of our listeners are probably also out in the field, so they go out and work on HVAC units, or they go out and work on pumps and pipelines and things in the field. So the dress code is more about safety as well, right? If you got longer hair like I do, pulling it back, making sure that you're not being unsafe. And this is one thing. It's funny, Patty, you mentioned that I've always struggled with being an engineer and starting my career in manufacturing. Is how do you hold on to the feminine aspect if you want, like I did, and still dress appropriately for the workplace and the work that you're doing. And I'm sure quite a few of our listeners struggle with that. So it's a great example for this group. So speaking of podcasts, really quickly, Patty, I was super excited. You launched your own podcast in 2020, if I'm correct, with the same name. So what made you extend to that platform? And what's the learning you've had in that process?
Well, the biggest learning is that it's a lot of work. I think that's
It is a lot of work. Amen to that. And I have a whole team behind me. So giving Bethany a shout out right now.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, definitely. Kudos to us for doing that work because it's not easy. That's a big learning lesson without a doubt. I started it because I named it the same name as my book, The Drama Free Workplace. It really was as a result of people saying to me some of the things that you've said to me, which is that's a great story. You should share it. And in that, I described earlier that this last pivot in my career has been from crisis manager to systemic change agent. And I'm just so committed no matter what. Not, this isn't about making money, this isn't about fame or fortune, but if I can get my message to any audience, anyone who might benefit from even one thing. If at the end of this podcast with you someone says I'm going to implement that 3-step process, if a leader who logs in says, you know what, we haven't really looked at our policies in a long, long time. If
Yep.
an HR person says, I never thought about it from that paradox perspective before. It really was just hearing people encourage me to just use, I, like you, do speaking, I do workshops, but there's only so many people you can reach. And so it was really just another avenue to be able to
Yep.
share some of these stories, and especially my investigations. And one of the things that I focus on is I have a series in my podcast called Stories from the Trenches, and I actually recreate investigations that I've
I highly
conducted.
recommend those, by the way. They're
They're
very
fun.
entertaining.
Yeah, grab your popcorn. So I
Yep.
also wanted to have some unique component.
Yep, absolutely. So I'd like to end our conversation with a thing that you've recently launched called the Rising Leaders Academy. And I was able to attend your webinar a week or so ago. And what you said to me and to the audience on that webinar was this was a dream come true for you. So tell us about that academy, what it means to you, and what's the dream that's coming true for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me talk about this because I do refer to this right now as my passion project. For many, many years, several decades, in fact, I've been seeing when it comes to issues of diversity, issues of attrition, issues of the challenge that organizations seem to have in leadership and having that be diverse. And I come from a profession, you don't think of the law being male dominated. It still is, even though
Mm.
50% of graduates are women, especially when you get to leadership ranks. So the last law firm job that I worked at a law firm with 800 attorneys, and I was the sole Latina shareholder. One.
Oh my gosh, Patty, are you serious?
Yeah.
And I will
So,
tell you, Patty, the engineering is worse. So only about 20 to 25% of engineering grads are women.
right.
And then the attrition rate for women dropping out of engineering type roles. I can't remember the exact numbers. There's a Society of Women Engineering study that we talked about an episode ago, but it's really high.
Yeah.
So it's very similar. Yep.
Yeah. So our incoming classes are bigger than engineers, but our attrition rate is even bigger
Oh,
because
wow.
you know what I mean? Because if we
That's
come in at
crazy.
50% women associates, and then you get to the top of the organizational chart, the drop off is incredible. So
Man.
I've worked within organizations, I've worked as a consultant, I've worked as an attorney, and I always it always blows me away that leaders say, we just don't understand. We just don't know why this is happening. And I'm, screaming, pulling my hair out saying, I do.
I got it over
I know
here.
what it is. Exactly. And as DEI has obviously become such a big, issue over the last year, many of us, myself included, have worked with leadership teams, whether it's on training or strategy, employee sentiment surveys, and I love that work. I've also been working with employees in employee focus groups, listening circles, and I love that, and seeing their answers on these surveys that we launch. But what I've longed dreamed of doing is really addressing that middle tier that often goes ignored, that what I call a rising diverse leader. And so it's someone who's no longer an entry-level employee, so they're maybe not getting the same love and attention that you do when you first join an organization or an industry, but you're not quite in the top leadership yet.
Right.
And it is the most, from an attrition perspective, it's the most dangerous years. And so that mid-career, typically 7 to 15, where when I start analyzing organizational charts, that's where the attrition is occurring, and especially with women and other diverse candidates. And so I really wanted to put together a program not only for that audience, but that addressed two areas in equal part. So one is that I feel like we as women are often told that in order to succeed, we have to fit into the current culture. And in many
Which
cases,
just hurts my heart.
I know. So, a question that I asked during the webinar that you attended was, how many of you have been told, yes, we're going to support your career by sending you to a conference that will teach you how to be more like a man? And a lot of people said yes.
Yep. I'll be honest, only the last probably 5 to 7 years, Patti, have I truly embraced who I am as a leader, all the faults and all the beautiful and flaws in that. But up until then, I had tried to be a man. I had tried to figure out how to walk like a man, talk like a man, hold myself like a man. And I finally just said, this is ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. So I
am who I am. I'm not a man, and I'm different from every other woman. I'm uniquely me.
Exactly. And you are, yes. And it's not just putting lipstick on, it's definitely being able to bring all of that,
Sure.
So that's been one thing that's been concerning to me, that, we seem to give this message to women that you have to turn yourself into a pretzel in order to fit in. But by the same token, the other message, has been this: we're not really giving you tools in terms of how to navigate the current system. And so what I'm, planning on doing in a lot of different ways, but the Rising Leader Academy is one, is to address both these areas. So what I mean by that is there are going to be components of the academy that are, look, the system is what it is. So we're not going to say that you need to, twist yourself into a pretzel, but we are going to help you navigate the current system while still being authentically you.
Because you can't change it overnight, to your point. Like you can't get up tomorrow and just, yep.
So just one example is that I think something that a lot of rising leaders, but women in particular, don't get is a really, really comprehensive lesson on the business of your business. Let's talk about what it is that actually makes you succeed in your industry, in your company. What is it that makes you most valuable? So again, leaning back on my own years, as a lawyer in a law firm, so many people think that they know, and they've never actually studied the business model of a law firm and what it is that actually makes that business succeed. So that's one example of the way in which the academy is really going to address how to navigate the current system. At the same time, what I don't want is, I'm nearly 30 years into my career, and I hear young women basically saying the same things that I said 10, 20, and 30 years ago. And so I just don't think that it works if we don't do the second part of what I'm planning on doing, which is we are going to groom you to be the next leaders who will actually make systemic changes. And one way that, I think that your listeners maybe can think about this or pitch it, doing this or any other type of program. But when we talk about that attrition, I'm in the business of, being persuasive, even though I'm no longer a lawyer. I am a recovering lawyer, so I still have that in me. And I always like to present things in a way where there is no other answer but to agree with me. And so when you talk about attrition and you look at the numbers and you say at the entry level, it's 25% women, but at the leadership level, it's 2% women. There can only be one of two explanations. There is no third. One explanation is that we as women are inherently inferior and just can't cut it. And I've yet to meet someone who, at least out loud, is willing to acknowledge that, they think that that's the real culprit here. If we agree that it is not that we are inferior, there is only one explanation, and that is that there is something systemic going on that is driving us away. There is no third explanation. And so I offer that as a way of maybe being able to help your listeners, whether they are leaders or employees or rising leaders, to kind of think about that second component. There is something systemic that absolutely occurs in every organization, that we need to groom these rising leaders to really start looking at things in a different way and hopefully finally changing those systems.
And Patty, I'm so excited about this, and I'm really excited. One of the ways you and I connected was in a book club where, as you know, it was very raw and vulnerable for me to learn things. And you're really focused on women of color, which I love, because after that book club, I started to look at my own workplace and was just stunned at the lack of diversity in general. But I was really looking for women of color, and when I looked at it, even in the lower ranks, there weren't that many women of color. So I'm like, there's something seriously wrong with the system here. So it's why I'm so excited to see what you're doing and to groom those women, because something has to change. And it should have changed yesterday, but at least we're making the steps in that direction.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, Patty, it's probably time for us to end our call. And I just loved it so much. It was so good to catch up with you. But as we end today, where can people find you, or more about your company and more about your book?
Sure. So as you mentioned in the beginning, the name of my company is PersuasionPoint. So we are at PersuasionPoint.com. That's probably the easiest way. I am pretty active on LinkedIn and very easy to find, so you can certainly find me there. The book is in every way possible. It's a hardcover, it's a Kindle, and on audiobook. So you can either go to Amazon or any other bookseller, but you can also find out about it on our website if you go there.
Okay. And then you also do speaking engagements as well. So if there's anybody out there looking for a great speaker, I'm personally and selfishly going to pitch Patty, because I've seen her do it and she's phenomenal.
Well,
So
thank
Patty,
you.
thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for your time today. It's been amazing. I love spending time with you. Thank you for the gift of your knowledge and the gift of your time.
It has been my pleasure, and I am so grateful to you for giving me the honor of being here with you. Thank you.
So to our audience, this is our April episode, and I will see you again in May. Talk soon, and until then, inspire your fire within. Bye, everybody.